AI is fueling stock market highs, economic growth, and a construction boom across the country. But it's also igniting fierce local debates about the benefits, the costs, and in many cases, whether the data centers that power AI should be built at all. Economics correspondent Paul Solman looks at how one of those battles is playing out in the Midwest right now.
Just right there is the Cozy Inn.
George Cullen has been in Janesville, Wisconsin for quite a while.
Which is the oldest continuously owned Chinese restaurant in America.
In all of America?
In all of America.
The family construction business, J.P. Cullen, has worked on some of Wisconsin's most famous structures.
We've been here for 6 generations and have been proudly building here all that time. In fact, we built the original tractor factory that was then turned into being the GM site.
On Wisconsin, on Wisconsin.
Once the economic cornerstone of Janesville, the giant GM plant, in its heyday employing 7,000 people.
But when the plant idled in 2008, unemployment soared to 13%, and the town became a nonpartisan symbol of the Great Recession.
The promise of Janesville has been the promise of America.
Hello, Janesville, and hello, Wisconsin. We love Wisconsin.
Even I was dispatched to the plant to cover the economic catastrophe. But almost a decade later, says Cullen, who also heads Janesville's Chamber of Commerce,
amazingly, we have replaced the number of jobs since that GM plant closed. It was hard and it took a lot of time, but we do have positive momentum here.
Positive momentum that could finally revive 250 acres of empty lot, where GM's plant used to sit, and possibly revive the city's budget with a data center.
There's nothing there. Our taxes are not being offset by a large user providing their property taxes. Those property taxes will help our schools, help our technical college, and help our city.
What was your initial reaction when you heard a data center might go there?
With that site having sat empty as long as it has, the positive nature that somebody was interested to put a new building on that site.
That's good.
That's a positive.
Especially since no one would fork out some $30 million to clean up the contaminated site once GM's plant was demolished 8 years ago. Then, last year, a Colorado-based developer offered to buy the lot, remediate, and build an $8 billion data center campus.
I think if there's an opportunity to bring some industry back that could really add to the tax base and employ a bunch of people, I'd love to see that being used.
Electrician Garrick Harwick is a business manager for IBEW Local 890. With data centers blooming nationwide, unions are reporting new significant demand for their members. Janesville's data center proposal came with a promise of hundreds of permanent jobs and at least 13,000 during construction, a major plus.
It could be, Joe the plumber up the street that gets a job because this comes here, and that kid goes to school with your kid, and it affects the whole community.
And then, of course, there's the case for data centers in general.
My administration will use every tool at our disposal to ensure that the United States can build and maintain the largest, most powerful, and most advanced AI infrastructure anywhere on the planet.
So last year, an executive order to fast-track environmental reviews and return sites like GM Janesville to, quote, productive use as expeditiously as possible, unquote.
Hey, hey! Ho, ho! Data centers have got to go! Hey, hey!
But now, given the nationwide groundswell against data centers, you're not going to be surprised to hear that some in Janesville aren't sold.
I'm not against economic development. I just want it to be reasonable, thought out, done in a way that is not going to put people in danger and harm the environment. You see the power plant there.
Pastor Roy Jewell lives less than a mile from the site, where his dad worked for 30 years. Among his concerns, excessive water use, noise, and light pollution.
This is right in the middle of a residential area.
And of course, he's worried about energy prices. The nation's largest electrical grid operator recently announced it will add more than $6 billion in costs to consumers over the next 3 years because of power demand from data centers. While the developer in Janesville declined an on-camera interview, it vowed the data center would minimize its impact on residents and the environment. Jewell is, well, skeptical.
What's existing now across the country, they can't prove it.
So he's part of what's become a wave of data center opposition. According to a recent Gallup poll, 70% of Americans oppose the construction of an AI data center in their community.
There's something about AI and its involvement, its impacts on people's employment prospects in the future, as well as the way they see the world in general, that has people especially riled up about these projects.
J.L. Holtzman reports on the AI data center backlash for climate website Heatmap. It's a uniquely unifying topic, she says, bringing together both those on the left.
While the American people are suffering, big tech continues to demand more. More data centers, more energy, more data collection, more American jobs replaced by AI, all on the feet of the American people.
And on the right, Tucker Carlson, for example.
The future that AI promises is worse for the overwhelming majority of the people, but it empowers and enriches a tiny percentage of the population. Like, that's so crazy.
There are so many political constituencies, movements that have found common cause here, as well as, the climate movement. And so altogether, you have, honestly, a pretty cosmic gumbo of politics.
According to a recent report by Data Center Watch, opponents delayed or blocked at least 75 projects worth $130 billion across the country in the first 3 months of this year alone.
We organized around a set of arguments that ultimately convinced Microsoft, in this case, and our village board to say no thanks.
Former bank executive Prescott Balch came out of retirement when Microsoft offered to build a data center in his small Wisconsin town, Caledonia. Were you leery of data center development at first?
I was not. In fact, if anything, I'm on the opposite side. I made a healthy living using them. It would be hypocritical to say that we should stop building them now that I'm retired.
The state of Wisconsin passed a sales tax break in 2023 to lure data centers and enhance economic development. But having now crunched the numbers for many projects, Balch says the promised windfall isn't nearly what it seems. Moreover, small communities might be betting on a bubble.
The volatility of the industry, the fact that it likes to disrupt itself all the time, that it's constantly changing. The risk is if something happens with that revenue stream, it's the current residents that end up having to pick up the tab on short notice.
Balch's skepticism has resonated in Janesville. This spring, 2 opponents of the data center were elected to its city council, which promptly ended the agreement with the developer. Even the Chamber of Commerce withdrew its support.
I think the mere scale of them, particularly in smaller communities, has woken people up. If it's something that big and that grand and that impactful, you have an obligation as civic leaders to step back and say, we are going to bring the community along to get them to agree that this is the right idea, or we're not going to do it.
The developer, however, says it's hoping to revive the project. But Janesville has stalled the deal for now, still looking for an economic engine to drive its future and clean up those 250 acres. Data center cash seemed an offer a city just can't refuse. Turns out, some can. For the PBS News Hour, Paul Solman in Janesville, Wisconsin.